This is only the second time I preached on this in my whole career. It's one of those hidden gems, right? So when I was in college, we had a New Testament professor who we all loved. So it was a conservative school, and he was an evangelical, kind of fundamentalist sort of guy. And so he took the Bible very seriously as a sort of moral and ethical source of how we're supposed to live our lives as Christians. But instead of policing the sexuality of people, like many of his colleagues, he understood that the Bible had way more to say about social and economic justice than it did about sex. So anyway, he happened to be a scholar of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. They're written by the same person. And he believed that this passage from Acts chapter 4 that Lance read for us was the foundational model of how Christian churches and Christian communities were supposed to organize themselves. So there was not only supposed to be social equality, that is, you love everyone no matter what their circumstances are, there was to be economic equality, meaning that no one had more wealth or financial resources than anyone else if you were in an authentic Christian community. So he believed this. As it says in verse 33, no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. He saw that as gospel. And so again, while many of his evangelical colleagues were obsessed with a handful of Bible verses that may or may not say something about same-sex relationships, he believed this verse was law. And so he did this. He proposed at this small evangelical fundamentalist liberal arts college that every employee, from the president to the custodian, should receive the exact same salary and benefits. And that's how they reacted. So it's sort of funny in retrospect. So this was a school that required every employee to be a Christian. The vast majority of the leadership of the school were people who believed that the Bible was inerrant. It was without any error. They were happy to make all kinds of rules based on what they called biblical values for people, but they roundly rejected this proposal and even laughed in his face when he made it. So incidentally, this isn't the only place in the Bible that rejects the idea of private ownership. So there's a law in Leviticus chapter 25. We don't hear about it much because it makes people uncomfortable. So it's a law that is designed to disrupt private ownership of land and the accumulation of generational wealth. It's called the Jubilee, or the Year of Jubilee. So in short, this is how it worked in theory. Every 50 years, Israel was to reset economic life by restoring family land that was lost, so that, like, if you got into financial trouble and had to sell your family's property, every 50 years you got that land back for free. It freed impoverished people from something that was like a debt service. So sometimes when you were in debt, you had to sell yourself as kind of a slave or a servant to another family. That was canceled, and other financial debts were canceled. And so this prevented permanent generational poverty, and it prevented generational wealth that just expanded and expanded and expanded. So it was sort of like this. It was like a 50-year-long game of Monopoly. Imagine that with our economy. A 50-year-long game of Monopoly, but then at the end, everything went back in the box, and we start all over again. So everyone's on a level playing field. So this was born out of a theological claim that land, human labor, and wealth ultimately belonged to God, not to people, and especially not to wealthy and powerful people. And in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, when Jesus is beginning his ministry in his first sermon, he begins by referring to this year of Jubilee. So this is what he says in that sermon. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's that year of Jubilee. But not everyone then, like now, was receptive of that idea. And after that sermon, you might recall that people tried to throw Jesus off a cliff. So anyway, back to this professor of ours. One spiritual practice that he took on in service of this worldview was dumpster diving. And he did this to feed his family, but he also did this to free up his resources so he could be more generous in his giving to people in need. And he would often brag to us that his kids had half and half on their cereal in the morning, not just regular milk. So anyway, when I was a senior in college, we took on this dumpster diving practice enthusiastically. So my roommates and I would make regular trips to grocery store dumpsters. We would fill our refrigerators and our cupboards with food. And after a couple of weeks of this, something remarkable started to happen. So all those kind of typical roommate complaints of like, who drank my milk? Or what happened to that box of cereal I bought last week? All those typical complaints just fell away. Right? So when there is an abundance of eggs and milk and cream and half, and bread and pastries and fruits and vegetables that you've just gleaned from a dumpster, you don't worry so much about what's yours. You don't say, well, I was the one who grabbed those donuts, so I get them. You just hold them in common. And so for this small season, we lived in a kind of utopia. No private ownership of anything that was in the refrigerator or in the pantry. And this created a kind of enthusiastic generosity. So anytime someone would come into our apartment, we would say, hey, come look and see what we got this week. And we would almost demand that they ate some of it. But even if you really believe that the Bible tells you so about something like this kind of utopian sharing is difficult to sustain. So I remember several years ago, one of Deb's colleagues, who was a dear friend of ours and also lived across the street from us, made this kind of proposition to me. And kind of following this Acts 4 thing, he said, I'm gonna buy a new lawnmower, and I think we should share it. It just makes sense that we would own. Why are there 10 lawnmowers on this block? Why don't we just share this lawnmower? It'll save us money. It's good for the environment. It doesn't waste as many resources. So I agreed, yes, let's do it. Let's hold this lawnmower in common. So he went out and bought the lawnmower, really nice, self-propelled model. And before I had the chance to pay him, he was cutting his lawn for the first time with this new lawnmower, and he hit this old iron pipe that was buried in the yard. And that bent the shaft on the new lawnmower, and he took it to a repair shop, and the guy said, with something like this, it's not really worth repairing. And I was like, you don't really expect me to pay you for a lawnmower that you broke and I never used. So that was the end of our experiment in holding property in common. But the truth is, I really did like this idea of sharing property in that way. I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if the church out on the parking lot had a big shed, right, and it had every garden or power tool imaginable. We all pitched in and bought it together, and then you could just come check it out once in a while, And so you wouldn't have to fill your garage with tools that you only use once or twice a year. So I really kind of believed it. But then this voice sort of crept in and said something like, well, what about me? I know we were sharing that, but what about me? What about my money? What about my rights? What about my needs? And the truth is that voice kills generosity. It kills the idea that the world is full of abundance. In some ways, it kills community. And when it comes to generosity, that voice makes you hold back a little bit. You might want to be generous, but that what about me makes you hold back, makes you afraid to share, afraid to give. And that voice, I believe, got the better of Ananias and Sapphira. I don't think they were bad people. I just think they were thinking, we got to hold back a little for ourselves just in case. So as we heard, following the example of Barnabas, the son of encouragement, Ananias and Sapphira on their own decide to sell a piece of property and to give the money to the church to take care of church members who couldn't get by on their own. I mean, what a generous impulse, right? But they didn't give all of the money to the church. They held some back. And so, maybe their sin there was that they were afraid, they let fear get the better of them. Maybe their sin was that they lied about it. In any case, I think we would all agree the punishment doesn't seem to fit the crime. It's a little harsh for holding some things back. But I don't think that's the point of the story. I don't think the point of the story is saying, like, if you are not 100% generous, you're going to be struck down. Because if that were the case, we would all be struck down, right? So I think the point is something more like this. Generosity, genuine, unbridled generosity, leads to an abundance of life for you and for others. It's for you and for others. But when you hold something back out of fear, when you let the voice that says, what about me, take you over, that generosity is compromised. And the gifts that generosity bestow are kind of compromised as well. So it's not so much that people in need are robbed of what they need, it's that you yourself are robbed of the gift of being generous. You're robbed of this incredible peace of mind that comes when you can actually free yourself from your worries about your possessions, your money, your property, and begin to rely fully on the generosity of God. Or, in other words, the goodness of life. Or in the church, on a beloved community that will always be there for you. So what if you really were free from the idea that you had to take care of yourself, and if you don't, everything will fall apart? So when you hold back, you're robbed of that experience. So Helen Keller said, no one ever became poor through giving. I think that's kind of getting at this faith, that, you can give away as much away as you want and you'll still be okay. I really do think this is true. I think generosity breeds generosity. It's a kind of two-way street. So I think, this prosperity gospel preachers have sort of twisted this teaching and said something like, give to me, enrich my ministry, and God will in turn enrich you. It's not really a calculation like that. That's not what Helen Keller was talking about. This is not a get-rich scheme that you can't become poor for giving. What I think she's offering is this timeless truth that if you are generous in all things, life will be generous to you. So in the simplest way, if you simply smile at someone, you've now given something, and they're likely going to smile back at you. If you say something kind to another person, they probably will be kind to you. If you appreciate someone, they will begin to appreciate you. And when you give your money, your possessions to others, you will always somehow end up having more than you will ever need. If, on the other hand, you go through life as though you deserve more, or you need more, or you desire more, if you are taken over by that voice in the head that says, what about me? Not only will God or the Holy Spirit see that in your heart, everyone else will too. You probably know people like that. You're like, I don't want to be around that person because they always want something, right? So, when that happens, over time, abundance in your life will dry up. So let me end with a spiritual practice from Eckhart Tolle and some wisdom from Jesus designed to help us become more generous people. So Eckhart Tolle says this. So this is the practice. Try this for a couple of weeks and see how it changes your life. So here's the practice. Whatever you think people are withholding from you, praise, appreciation, assistance, loving care, and so on, whatever you think people in the world is withholding from you, give it to them. You don't have it? Just act as if you did, and it will come to you. Then soon after you start giving, you will start receiving, he says. You cannot receive what you do not give. Whatever you think the world is withholding from you, you already have it. But unless you allow it to flow out of you, you won't even know that you have it. And this includes abundance. And then he finishes this way. The law that outflow determines inflow is expressed by Jesus in this powerful teaching. Jesus said, give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be placed into your lap. What Jesus is saying there is that if we are generous with life, we will get even more than we give. So friends, give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be placed